What's up, everybody? Something new going on for Whitetail Mission is we have started a podcast. This is a way for us to share some tips and stories as well as meet other people. So we're excited to go into this new type of media. Today's video, we're actually going to be covering a few tips and we're going to have a full podcast and then the shortened video. If you'd like to listen to the full podcast, we'll put the link down below in the description. We are on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, and then we're using Anchor to do all of our podcasts. If you have any questions, just let us know on our social media in the comments, and we hope you enjoy. All right, so on today's video, like I mentioned earlier, this is a shortened video on YouTube, but we'll have the full-length podcast on all the apps that I mentioned. And today is the top 5 tips for hunting Kansas. These are our tips from our experience from last year. It is just the top 5 things we noticed. A lot of them can be applied just to any hunting scenario in general, but for Kansas specifically, this is what we thought worked well, and these are things that we noticed. Doesn't mean that there's not other methods or ways that you can go about hunting Kansas. It's just what worked for us. So to start out, the first tip that we have is tip number 1, no trees, no problem. So secluded pieces of timber, small chunks of brush that we would find deer bedded in, will hold more deer than you think. So even when we went in the summer, we jumped, I think, 2 or 3 good bucks out of small, tiny pieces of brush and then small pieces of property that had barely any woods on it. I can think of one we went to in the summer, had, I think, under 10 acres, and the entire property was 400 acres. And so you don't need a ton of timber to hold deer. That's one of the big things we noticed. And we hunted 2 areas that were, one was 80 acres, another was over 200, and both had less than 10 acres of woods on them, because you can find draws that are good travel corridors. And so really, at first we thought we had to have timber, but then we realized that you don't necessarily need the timber to find the deer.
And that's just because where we're from, like, it's all woods, and that, a lot of ag and, strips of timber is just not something that we grew up hunting. Well, Connor did some, but I mean, where I grew up hunting, it's just all wood. That may not be surprising to some people who have hunted in that type of, terrain, but to us, it was definitely, it was different.
And with that, from what we noticed on scouting, we even found a lot of beds and areas that deer were staying and holding up in. Were one areas they could see 180 to 360. I'm thinking of one we scouted this summer where there were secluded pieces of timber outside of the main portion of the timber, and that's where we found tons of beds. And it's because anything that comes in, like people, they could see, or any predators around. I mean, it was all 360. And so, one, that's important, I feel like, to think about for access, but 2, the properties to hunt in general.
One of the bucks we've seen this summer was literally bedded on one tree and he was facing the access, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Right before come in. I mean, timber behind him, wind coming over the hill behind him. He had his back towards the hill, and he was facing the entrance to the place. So anybody who accesses it right there, you're going to walk right in. He's going to be gone before you ever even see him.
I think a lot of properties, when you look at in Kansas, you look at some of even the wildlife department's properties or the WEHA properties. A lot of those I feel like get overlooked, because even from what I've noticed, there were properties we drove by that I was like, oh, that's not going to be much, but we're driving by it, let's just go look. And then when we drive by and we just see, like, who knows how many deer, and it's like, okay, well, maybe this is something we should consider. Because I feel like, I mean, I'll be honest, to start out, I mean, I've hunted before where there's not just giant blocks of timber, but to start out when we were in Kansas, there were properties that I was like, that just looks terrible. That's got to be for bird hunting or, something like that. And then when we went there, it was like, dude, there are deer all over this thing.
A lot of those places get overlooked, and if they are getting overlooked, they're not getting hunted, and there's going to be deer there, even if there isn't, ag or timber.
All right, so our second tip is ground hunting. I know we kind of covered a little bit of this already, but it can be difficult if you're used to hunting out of a stand a lot. Like, that's how I grew up, but being in Kansas, you're not always offered that opportunity. So some places, yes, some places are kind of like here at home, but a lot aren't. So don't be afraid to venture out and hunt off the ground, because there's a lot of really good hunting opportunity in a lot of places in Kansas that just don't allow trees. And part of me was kind of writing some of that stuff off at first, just because there wasn't a tree. Like, and growing up, that's kind of how I was. No tree, well, then I can't hunt it.
What's funny is to kind of go opposite of that. Like some of those places without trees, we're like, crap, how do we hunt it? But the flip side of it was some places that we went to had a bunch of timber, but it was just so thick that a stand, you would almost have no shooting lanes. And so some of those, like, there's plenty of timber, but we had to hunt it from the ground because it was too thick, there's too much. And so it's kind of like completely opposite of like it's wide open to it's so thick that you can't even really stand hunt effectively. Or if you could, it's like, well, I could hunt over there, out of a stand because it's opened up a bit, but then you'd sit there and the deer would just go through all the thick stuff back and forth. That's where the trail, that's where the sign was. And so it made sense to do that.
And off from the ground, you can see for forever. And, my first reaction was hop in a tree. This is going to be great because there was a ton of deer sign in there. But once you get in a tree, the canopy of those cedars is just so thick, you can't shoot anywhere, so that just kind of leaves you stuck on the ground or trying to, pick holes.
Another thing too that surprised me, because I haven't been on the ground with deer a ton other than scouting, running into them or walking in and running into them, is how much you can get away with. Like the hunt that I shot that buck on, dude, we were sitting in the middle with nothing within 10 yards of us. That doe got 5 yards from us. And then that buck walked up at 30 without, and the other buck was following the first doe. And so it's just how much you can get away with if you just sit still and don't move.
That is a gem.
Now, if you know some cover there, because I think it's important to have cover in front of you and then cover behind you, because I think that would help break up. And I'm thinking of that hunt with the 2 bucks that came up on you. I mean, they were both 15 and in?
Well, the first one was about 25, and I don't think he would have ever seen me had I not drawn my bow because he heard it. My arrow tinked in my rest. But the second buck, his doe got to 10 yards and never knew I was there. And he's actually the one that spotted me at like 12 steps. And she didn't have a clue for a while. And like I said, it's just, I think if you can fool their nose, it's very surprising what you can get away with, if you just sit still. It's not hard to fool their eyes. Now, if they get within feet from you, they're going to see you. But if you sit still, you may get a shot opportunity because, they're, fairly curious animals. And especially during the rut, the bucks are just kind of dumb.
All right, so our third tip is to be vocal. This is a tip that worked for us, especially during November, during the rut. There were multiple times when we would either call the deer, snort wheeze the deer, and get their attention, make them come back, make them consider coming in. And to go along with that, kind of tied into this tip is don't be afraid to use a decoy. We had one the entire season and didn't put it up once. And there were moments when we had bucks coming in and looking, and it was like if we just had something for them to look at. I'm thinking of a hunt that we had a buck in a field on private, and we grunted and snort wheezed, and he bristled up, and he made a complete semicircle and got downwind of us before he ended up taking off. I feel like if we maybe had had a decoy or something he could see, there might have been a chance he would have just come straight in. But one interesting thing with that is that we just noticed that these deer respond to calls, aggression, especially when it gets into that time of year. Not saying that deer other places won't, but I felt like, you can add to this too, I felt like we had more success calling to deer in Kansas than I've ever had in Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah, 1,000%. Yeah, maybe on some private land, around here maybe, but all I've ever tried is public land. And I've grunted a few deer in, and I've tried rattling over the years, but never had much success with it. But Kansas is a whole new world. Honestly, one of the things that just blew my mind was the night that we called that buck in, literally goofing around. Like we were sitting there, and as a last ditch effort, I was like, let's just go crazy with it. And I'm clashing horns together. Connor's breaking limbs. We're breaking sticks and throwing leaves and just laughing. And we throw everything down, and I look over, and there is a pretty solid buck flying off of some private land headed right at us. And he ended up getting within about 80 yards.
That's what being on the ground added for us as well. We could make it more realistic compared to just sitting in a tree and clashing some horns. Because we had that one. We had the buck that we grunted at, snort wheezed at in November. The hunt before that, we had the wide 8-point that we called, and he came back looking and then ended up going back away again. So that's another deer I feel like maybe we had something for him to look at that he could have come. So I think don't be afraid to be vocal, but whether it's grunting, snort wheezing, rattling, but at the same time, it's not like, we're saying sitting in the stand every 5 seconds in November, just clashing horns together and grunting and expecting everything to come flying out from behind every tree.
I had tried, the whole tie the horns to your bow rope and drop it down to the ground and let them clank around. I had tried that multiple times in early November, hunting in a couple of different spots, and didn't have no luck with it. And then the night that we were just talking about a while ago, where I had 2 bucks come up on me, I hadn't sit 20 minutes, and I had done a pretty realistic rattling sequence on the ground, and I had that first buck come in, and he come in looking. So I really feel like that's why he come in. The second one just come in following a doe. But, I think those realistic sounds off the ground really, really help their senses when it comes to, whether or not they're going to come in and investigate. It was very, very cool to actually grunt at a deer and watch their whole demeanor change. That first buck we grunted at this year was a whole new experience for me, because I had grunted at a lot of bucks over the years, and most of the deer around here just keep on going. They might stop and look, but they just keep on going. And that first buck that we grunted at this year, legitimately his whole posture changed. He turned, looked, stood up, and then fluffed up, and then just come looking. I mean, circling around us, but he was definitely interested, and that was new to me. It was really neat to watch. So I'm excited. I really think we should use the decoy this next year. It may not work, but the one time it does, I feel like it could be something.
And our fourth tip is to know what public land options you have available to you. And I know this isn't exactly a tip for hunting Kansas in general. It's mainly for people who hunt public land, potentially non-resident hunters. But anyone that's looking to hunt public land like we did, this is an important tip, because you'll have department-owned land, you'll have the WEHA program, and there's some specifics that go into it. So back home in Oklahoma where we hunt, we're used to hunting properties that might be 500 to 1,000 acre public land pieces owned by the wildlife department, thousands of acres on some of them even. In Kansas, there are department-owned lands, and we went to some of these pieces of property. We hunted some of them, and then we hunted some WEHA properties, which still could be that 300-400 piece properties, but some of them also are 50 acres and less. So just knowing the different types of properties you have available to you, and don't underestimate what 50 acres can hold. Whether it's all timber, what we talked about earlier, if it's not, and it has a little bit of trees on it, just don't underestimate the size of it. Because when I first started looking, I was like, all right, I'm going to find the big department land. I'm going to find the biggest pieces of WEHA. And then when I kept looking more, I was like, well, actually this piece right here doesn't look bad. So just know what's available to you. And going along with that, we didn't hunt any of these. I know I didn't, and I'm pretty sure Trey didn't. But some of the WEHA properties have specific regulations where it's an e-check property, where it limits how many people can go there, and it tells you that you have to check in online. So just make sure you look up online on the Wildlife Department's website to see the rules before you just go onto a property. And one of my favorite looking properties while map scouting ended up being spring only access. So we couldn't go look at that. So just make sure that you look at all these options before you waste the gas to potentially go somewhere that you can't even technically be at.
That's what I was fixing to point out, was make sure that you look when it's open, because just because it's on X as a walk-in access property does not mean it's open for deer hunting. And some of them are only open for youth hunting, period. So just make sure that you check before you, like Connor said, drive all the way out there and waste your time.
If it's department owned, they usually have signs, or they have something somewhere to let you know. With the WEHA property, they have a sign that will say WIHA, and they'll say on it, foot access only, and then it'll say if it's open to youth only or spring only for turkeys. So just make sure you look at that before you step onto a property, is what I would say. And then we keep mentioning OnX. Love OnX. It's awesome. But I will tell you to check the Kansas website. They have, I think it's called like Argus or something, Argus Explorer. I don't remember what it's called. But they have their WEHA map that they update on there, and that's the most updated version. In fact, the 2022-2023 property map just came up, I think, August 1st.
All right, so our next tip, it involves the map scouting. Turn your crop layers on. If you're going to be in a state that has crop, I would turn that on, because that can play a huge role. I mean, you know, some bigger pieces of public, you know, may have crop on it, but even if you're looking at smaller properties of public that maybe 50 acres of nothing but a small piece of timber and, you know, hayfield, but there may be crop all over the private around it.
And with map scouting in general too, that I feel like that has to be the first step. Boots on the ground is important, but I think it's important to get on there, look at the topography, look at the travel corridors. If you zoom in even on whether it's OnX or if you get on Google Earth, I really like their imaging. You can even see trails, and if it doesn't have cattle on it, you know those are got to be deer trails if the property doesn't have cattle. And you can even see some of that before you even go there. On top of that, where we killed deer this year, I don't know that we killed a deer anywhere that we didn't have a pin set before we ever went there. Like map scouting, I thought we did excellent this year. If we put a pin, 75% of the time when we went to it, it was like, yep, this pin is staying. And so that makes it a whole lot easier doing that ahead of time. And then we learned about one big thing for me with that crop layer is we learned about crop rotation. And it's not always this way. Some people might, you know, some farmers may do beans and they may always do beans. But we generally noticed that if it was beans the year before, it was going to be corn that next year, or if it was corn, it was going to be beans. It was a consistent rotation between the two. I mean, they might throw wheat in there, like after they harvest the beans, we noticed wheat went in later in the year, but the rotation between beans and corn was pretty consistent on just about anywhere we went.
But yeah, definitely go put boots on the ground, because just because OnX says that there was corn there last year, there may not be crap there this year, you know, and that doesn't always mean that there's not going to be deer there either. We took almost a whole day last year just driving by the properties we had and just marking what was planted. You know, you can mark them ahead of time, but go drive around, put boots on the ground and mark what's there.
We got to the point last year where map scouting, you zoom out on X and it was like, good Lord, we have, you know, both units we have access to, we just have completely marked waypoints. This is just too much. And so then just driving around, we were able to narrow down.
Yep. And just mark everything that looks good to you, because, you know, if you show up somewhere and, you know, it turns out to not be what you hoped it would be, you're going to have other pins around it. That's what I did a lot. Just zoom out, look at what you got around it, look at what's close, and go bounce to it. You know, it may not even look as good as the place that you're at, but it may turn out to be better. You know, just having options. And if it's not, like Connor said, rip it off there, and you're doing nothing but narrowing yourself down to your better places. And that's going to help you out and make you more efficient by the time November comes. And I know not everybody has time to go up there and do that ahead of November. A lot of guys are going in November. They're taking a week and going. But yeah, our OnX looked like a dadgum Christmas tree lit up before, you know, season last year, but it got better as the season.
The reason it looked like a Christmas tree is we had so many different colors, because we said, all right, if it's a yellow pin, that means it's like a for sure that's a spot we want to go. We've seen it. We plan to hunt that. If it's blue, it's like, hey, this is a spot of interest we really want to go look at that we haven't. And then we would start, you know, color coordinating certain things of like, hey, here's our best spots. Here's a spot that could probably be good, but maybe not till November. And then we kind of went through and color coded to help with that efficiency. But I do like the point you mentioned of if you're not going up till November, you may not have that time. And you'd think it would suck to not be in the woods, but taking even that first day to go drive around to one, look at properties, and two, see where people are with that. Because like when we took that, we had some properties that we map scouted, really liked, and we're like, yeah, we're going to go there. And then that evening we went out, we're like seeing people from New Jersey, from like Minnesota or something. It was like, okay, there's some people around here. And so that allowed us to kind of even say, it looks good, but maybe in November with all those people there, if you're a guy who only can go in November, you can say, I don't want to be there, because there's so many people already there. And then you can go to those other pins that you have on your map. So those are our top 5 tips for hunting Kansas. Again, these can be applied to other places, and we're not experts on Kansas. This is just the tips we came up with after 1 year. And we talked about other tips as well throughout. We started with a certain tip, but we might have got into other things. So these are just what we've noticed. If you've seen our videos, we had a little bit of success. We're heading back there this season again. We're hoping to be able to repeat that success on some of the same properties, some new properties we have map scouted and plan to go to. Again, if you have any questions, you can find us on any of our social media, comment on this video, And the full podcast, I'll put the link below in the description, but you can find it on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, and then we use Anchor to create the podcasts. So if you have any questions, just let us know. Thanks for watching.